Hello everybody, I have the metronome on. Okay. Hello everybody, my name is Beckaranger, and welcome to Beckaranger Reads Legend of Zelda YAOI. This one is called Countdown, and it's by Winged Obsessor on DeviantArt. And it's called Countdown, a Vio X Shadow one-shot. Why I do this to myself, I don't know. 10. For a New Year's Eve party, this seemed rather overrated. At least that was Vio's opinion. He'd only agreed because Princess Zelda had practically begged him to come, along with all the other 4 links. She had promised that it would only be a small gathering, maybe 10 to 15 people. And up until about 11:30 at night, it had been. But word had gotten out and spread, and soon there were a few more people in the room, and then a couple more. Then it was being moved to the grand reception hall where there were already long tables filled with snack foods and drinks and desserts. And somehow, Vio knew that he'd gotten conned into attending one of Zelda's infamous holiday bashes. There was no problem for the others, of course. They loved the attention. Red especially. He was always most comfortable with their fans, and at first sight of them had gotten to implant himself firmly in their midst. Blue had followed. Blue rarely let further than 10 feet away from him nowadays, and Green stayed protectively by Zelda's side. And Shadow? Vio's brain strayed away from the thought of the crimson-eyed Shadow teen every time. Every time he popped into his head. 9. All Vio had wanted was a quiet night. Give me a minute. At home to sit and finish his book, and definitely not to think of Shadow. But Green had insisted, saying that he stayed at home far too often and needed to get out more. Red had given him those damn puppy dog eyes he was so good at, and Blue had just snorted and turned away and muttered, "What a wimp." Of course, that had gone over well. After the long ensuing discussion, Vio had changed silently in his room, ignoring the single black tunic hanging all the way in the back of his closet as he pulled out a dress shirt and pants. The only thing he had been able to find of Shadow's had been that tunic, and he couldn't bear to look at it any more. Like Blue said, what a wimp. 8. The walk to the castle was not unpleasant in and of itself. While the night was colder and strictly comfortable, a fresh coat of snow covered everything available and gave it an ethereal feel to it. I don't know how to say that. Vio stayed ahead of the other 4. 3, he had to harshly remind himself. Only 3. Ignoring Red's excited chatter and Blue's muttered side comments, ignoring his green counterpart's attempts to meditate between the two, when Blue began yelling, desperately ignoring the lack of sound beside him, the absence of the black-booted feet sending chunks of frozen snow skittering off every which way, the warm arm that wasn't hooked to his, trying to tug him off the well-trodden path and push him teasingly into the snow. No, he was not going to think of Shadow. 7. It had been easy for the first hour or so, just the 5 of them, sitting at the small reception room in one of the castle's turrets, positioned perfectly to see the fireworks of the New Year go off over town. Red had stood at each window, trying to decide which would provide the best angle to see the colored lights, with an indulgent Green suggesting one over another in between his conversation with Zelda, and a strangely calm Blue sitting in a window seat and staring out over the rooftops. Vio had added small comments every now and then when either Green or Zelda turned to him briefly, but mostly sat back in his comfortable chair, watching the flames in the nearby fireplace slowly shrink in size and intensity. Shadow had always liked fire. His rooms in the Dark World, Vio was all too familiar with them, had always had at least one fireplace with flames crackling merrily away in each, and he had spent many days and nights, his brain stubbornly reminded him, sprawled lazily in front of one of them. lounging in one of the blood-red carpets with a book in hand. Contrary to the other three Lynx beliefs, he had been perfectly content there. There were things to read, and plenty to eat, and the rest of the company was a little lacking Shadow. And even if the rest of the company was a little lacking, Shadow far more than made up for it. He didn't like the way Green was eyeing him now. 6. The move from the turret room had been gradual enough that Vi hadn't really noticed what had happened. Had it begun from a suggestion from Zelda to go and get more hot cocoa? Or it had been Red, insistently trying to get the best view possible? Either way, they descended from one room to another, each filled with a few more people than the last. Zelda making introductions and ushering the four around until Vio came up to her and tapped her on the shoulder with a frown. "I thought you said this was going to be nothing but a small party between friends," he half-asked, half-stated, and Zelda giggled. "Oh, Vio, this is a small party. There can't be more than 50 people here, and they're my friends, too," she chided briefly, before turning to meet and greet another few people with a well-practiced smile, leaving Vio alone. Alone. That hadn't been anything he had to worry about before leaving the Dark World, before leaving Shadow. They'd always been together, and then Shadow's hand resting on his shoulder or hip, his arm curving around his waist, elbows linked as they walked from place to place. Not even alone at night, that tan-toned body pressed tightly yet innocently against his. Hands and fingers, arms and legs all intertwined, and neither could tell where they left off or the other began. Both had loved it that way. Both had loved each other. Had. 5. Vio had escaped the noise and chatter of the crowd, trying to find his way back into the small, uncomfortable room, but stopped dead in the midst of the deserted hall. In the midst of the deserted hallway, when he heard voices. Don't know what you. Shh, relax. It sounded almost like Red and Blue, but Blue sounded so nervous, and Red so not. Vio peered around the corner to a most unexpected sight. Red was backing a nervous-looking Blue into a wall. A string of mistletoe hung above their heads. Oh, God. "Come on, Blue," Red's innocent voice giggled. "It's a party. We're supposed to let loose, show our wild sides. That's what you told me, anyway." "Red," Blue mumbled, and even in the faint moonlight, Vio could see the blush on his cheeks. "I didn't mean like this." "But it's mistletoe, Blue. You have to kiss under the mistletoe." Red's voice grew softer, steps smaller as Blue's back pressed into the wall and Red pressed up against him, blushing himself. But Blue didn't say any more. Arms curling to grip Red's elbows and keep him there, as Red rose to his tiptoes, upturned face expectant and hopeful. And now Blue was leaning downward, face shadowed enough that Vio couldn't see what he was thinking, and he didn't want to see. He turned and fled the opposite way. 4. He'd run as fast as he could down the spiraling stairwells and staircases, only pausing to take a deep, gasping breath about halfway up, unable to get what he'd just seen out of his head. Blue hated Red, hated him, but it wasn't fair. Why did they get a happy ending when all he'd wanted for himself in Shadow? When that was all he'd wanted for himself in Shadow. Oh, what did I do? What did I do? Great. What the fuck is this? Okay, we're here again. Cool, keyboard shortcuts. 3. It was his fault the Shadow Team was no longer by his side. He had been the one to betray his lover. He had been the one who tried to break the source of Shadow's power, his very life force, and the look in his eyes when he discovered the betrayal was enough to break Vio's heart all over again, each and every time he thought about it. 2. And Shadow had dissolved into the light that he always shied away from, the light that he had avoided deep in his rooms within the Dark World, the light that he said he could taste each time he kissed Vio. to which Vio had replied with a snort and shut him up for a while. 1. Nobody else had seen the look in his eyes, but at the last moment before he disappeared. The brief glance at Vio filled with every emotion possible. Desire, longing, anxiety, regret, anger, fear, and love. Vio missed his love. He reached the turret room as the crowd began to spilled out into the courtyard, screaming and shouting some sort of countdown into the frozen air. It was impossible to keep those errant thoughts and feelings locked inside. He was alone, and nobody else could see. He whispered those words that he kept locked inside of him for what felt like ages. I'm sorry, Shadow. I love you. The gates of his mind opened. 1,000 kisses, touches, oh no, tender whispers fell like blues upon him. He bowed under the onslaught, gripping the windowsill tighter and tighter. 1,000 smiles, laughs, hugs. His shoulders hunched as he imagined the feel of Shadow's arms wrapping around him once more. 100 days of walking up to that mischievous grin. 100 nights of falling asleep in that warm embrace. Innumerable casual bumps and jostles accompanied by that low, husky chuckle. The one that echoed in his right ear now as those soft yet rough and callous hands slid down his arms to twine fingers with him again. The taller body pressing against him as Vio tilted his head back once more to that broad shoulder. A single tear slipping down his cheek, being brushed away by a hand that was not his own. Oh, how he'd ache for that touch. Happy New Year, the crowd shouted. Below, Vio opened his eyes. Was it the sky that was filled with fireworks, or was his mind nearly exploding with happiness? The touches behind him were real. He could see the locks of violet hair out of the corner of his eye. He feel every breath the person behind him let out against his oversensitive earlobe. Smell that rich, warm scent that he'd been lacking from his life for far too long. He didn't understand what had happened, how Shadow had come back to him, but he wasn't going to complain. There would be enough time for questions later. For now, it was enough to stand at the window in the arms of his love, not alone. Happy New Year, Shadow, Vio whispered, and the teeth, molesting the tip of his ear, loosened enough so the mouth that they belonged to could slide further down to Vio's lips and murmur against them. Oh, I missed that.
There's a rotten train. There's no rotten train. There's no train under your tree.
I'm not going to be doing this.
Let's go. I know, don't they come that way? Becky wants to put her over to the express line.
Happy New Year, Vio, my love.